Black Op Radio presents 50 Reasons for 50 Years. Why the Warren Commission may be the greatest fraud perpetrated on the American public. Now your host, Len Osanek.
Quoting from an interview with Lyndon Johnson from the Atlantic Monthly magazine of July 1973, during coffee, the talk turned to President Kennedy, and Lyndon Johnson expressed his belief that the assassination in Dallas had been part of a conspiracy. He never believed that Oswald acted alone, although he could accept that he pulled the trigger. He said, and Leo Janus wrote, "We had been operating a damn murder incorporated in the Caribbean." In 1976, a House Select Committee was formed and asked to reinvestigate the JFK assassination after the public had completely lost its faith in the Warren Commission and the report. And no wonder when President Lyndon Johnson never believed it. The public was so outraged that it demanded new hearings and investigation, since it had now been revealed CIA had ties to other assassinations and assassination attempts. It's time to hear firsthand of what was learned when the House Select Committee on Assassination released its report in 1978. It's time you hear firsthand from a former Senate investigator. It's time you hear from, in his own words, Dan Hardway.
My name's Dan Hardway, and I am convinced that the Central Intelligence Agency ran at least one, and possibly more than one, disinformation operations against the House Select Committee on Assassinations. I began working on the staff of the committee in July of 1977. I was a law student at Cornell and accompanied Bob Blakey to Washington when he took over as chief counsel. I was assigned to the staff task force that was investigating possible connections between intelligence agencies and Lee Harvey Oswald. When we first arrived, the CIA was totally uncooperative, and there was no agreement to provide access to any agency information. My work was dependent upon gaining access to CIA records. While waiting for negotiations between the committee and the agency to reach some kind of agreement on that issue, my work was largely restricted to review of previously released information and the critics' theories and speculations. I recall one incident that occurred in this period very vividly. I was sent to Jacksonville, Florida with investigator Gaten Fonzie to interview a retired CIA officer. Upon our arrival, we handed him our committee credentials, telling him that we were there to ask him some questions on behalf of Congress. He flipped the credentials back at us and told us, "So you represent Congress. What the F is that to the CIA? You'll be gone in a few years, and the CIA will still be here." That really sums up a lot of the problems that we had. At the beginning, Bob Blakey was skeptical of any CIA involvement in the assassination. He was also aware that his time and budget were very limited, and that he was working for a congressional committee, not a prosecutor's office. He emphasized that the product was to be a final report and possibly proposed legislation. I remember many discussions with him early on where I and others pressed for more investigation into possible conspirators. Bob's response was consistent. You have to prove a conspiracy first. We cannot put all of our eggs in one basket and investigate possible conspirators if we can't prove that there was a conspiracy. Bob Blakey did, however, negotiate a very good agreement with the agency that gave us unprecedented access to their files, or at least what we thought was unprecedented access. The deal was that we could see any file we requested so long as we saw it at Langley, and nothing left Langley except what we could carry in our heads. Even our notes stayed there. My primary assignment on Task Force 5 was to research and investigate the CIA's awareness of Lee Harvey Oswald's activities in Mexico City. From the fall of 1977 to midsummer 1978, Ed Lopez and I had an office at CIA headquarters in Langley. We were able to request access to any file which we could identify. As a result of my research during this period, I became convinced that the agency had obtained photographs of Oswald in Mexico City, or at least of someone claiming to be Oswald. I was also convinced that someone had impersonated him in telephone calls to the Russian embassy, if not in person, at the Russian and Cuban embassies. I had also learned that the Cuban embassy camera surveillance operation was testing an impulse camera that was triggered automatically during the days Oswald was alleged to have been at the embassy. The photographs from this camera were never produced for our review. No one knew what had happened to them. I believed then and still do that the assassination bore the earmarks of an intelligence operation. I thought that a way to get into the operation to try to unravel it was to look at the disinformation portion of the assassination and to work back from that. I identified the sources of the stories that came out immediately after the assassination with detailed information about Oswald and his pro-Castro activities. I started asking for CIA files on the individuals who told those stories and had seen quite a few files by midsummer, although I never got to see all of them. That is when the CIA changed the procedures on us. They brought George Joannides out of retirement to be the new liaison with me and Ed. He closed our office at Langley. The agency set up a safe room for us to use in the committee offices. I no longer had direct contact with any CIA employees to request files. All further requests for documents or files had to be in writing. Files were not produced for weeks after being requested. My whole inquiry into areas outside and inside the scope of my portfolio pretty much ground to a halt. Before I was shut down, I'd been able to document many links between David Phillips and most of the sources of the stories that came out immediately after the assassination with detailed information on Oswald and his pro-Castro proclivities. I confronted David Phillips with those links in an interview at our offices on August 24th, 1978. He was extremely agitated by that line of questioning, but was forced to admit that many of the sources were not only former assets that he had managed at JM Wave, but were also assets whom he was personally managing in the fall of 1963. And that brings us back to Mr. Joannides and the disinformation operation ran by the CIA against the House Select Committee on Assassinations. They considered my research and requests to be, quote, aggressive harassment. The agency worked hard to discredit me and Ed Lopez in the eyes of our bosses at the committee. For example, on August 18, 1978, Scott Breckenridge, a CIA liaison, met with Gary Cornwall and told him that Ed and I labored under a burden of credibility in the agency and are so callow that we did not want to trust them with the kind of information that they were seeking. When Gary indicated that the CIA should tell them what the source of their concern was, Breckenridge replied that it was primarily their attitude and conduct, and I did not feel it constructive to discuss it further, the kind of information we were seeking. While there were a couple other things I wanted at the time, I didn't really learn what the information they were concerned about us getting hold of was until Jeff Morley called me about what he had found in the George Joannides 201 file around 2 decades later. It turns out that Joannides was running the propaganda shop at Jamwave in 1963 and had direct responsibility for the DRE, the main source of pro-Castro Oswald stories before and after the assassination. Jeff filed a lawsuit seeking more information about Joannides and his involvement in anti-Castro Cuban activities in 1963. As part of their response to that lawsuit, the CIA in a sworn affidavit acknowledged that George Joannides served in a covert capacity at least twice, once in the early 1960s in a covert operation codenamed JM Wave or Jamwave, and as a CIA representative to the House Select Committee on Assassinations. The agency did not trust us with the kind of information we were seeking, and they brought someone out of retirement who knew where to not let us look, and he shut us down. In his annual review, his boss at the CIA wrote regarding the firm position Joannides took with the young investigators that if the peculiar nature of the work did not call on Mr. Joannides for all his talents of his wide experience, it nevertheless was his experience and quick perceptions that ensured a superior performance. Indeed. His experience told him what to keep us away from, and our requests, once slowed, allowed him to quickly perceive where we were trying to go. I only regret that we were not able to mount more of a challenge to his talents. Bob Blakey has called what the CIA did obstruction of justice. Ed and I knew what they were doing when they were doing it, and we complained long and hard to our supervisors, including Bob. He has since said, "I wrote off the complaints. I was wrong. The researchers were right." Small comfort in light of the fact that it's been 50 years and there is still no truth and no accountability from the agency. I still believe that there was intelligence operational involvement in the assassination. And I still believe that at the time, a hard look into Bill Harvey and the post-assassination disinformation operation had the best chance of unraveling that involvement. But the opportunity is past, and I fear unrecoverable. Phillips had 3 cigarettes lit at the same time when I pressed him on his assets disinformation campaign. But looking at it like a poker game, I only had a deuce in the hole, and it wasn't wild. The ace that I had been looking for but didn't find was the fact that Joannides had taken over from Phillips at JM Wave, and there was an entire active operation in 1963 with DRE and Oswald. We now know Joannides ran the DRE as their case officer. We may never know if Phillips was still involved in that operation. I remember the day the acoustics report came in and Bob learned that we had evidence of 2 shooters and hence a conspiracy. I can still see it clearly in my memory. He and I were standing in the hallway outside Team 5's office. He said to me, "My God, we've proven a conspiracy, but we haven't investigated the conspirators." I told him that we should never have put our eggs into one basket, but that I did have some ideas along those lines based on the research that he had allowed me to do. I volunteered to write a memorandum based upon a motive, means, and opportunity analysis. I wrote the memo in the CIA safe room on sequentially numbered pages with purple border stamped top secret. When I was done, Bob read it in the safe room. I do not know if anyone else outside of the CIA has ever seen it. The Assassinations Record Review Board told me that there is no record of the memo in anything that they were able to find. When the safe room was set up, the agency told the committee that after the final report was written, all working papers, not formal HSA memorandum of interviews, transcripts of hearings, or depositions, or committee documents, will be destroyed. I guess they probably, innocently of course, thought that the memorandum was just a working document. Joannides is dead. Phillips is dead. Harvey is dead. Documents no longer exist. The secrets are safe for another 50 years.
Stay tuned for the next installment as we expose week after week 50 lies the Warren Commission would like you to believe.